Reading from the 21st chapter of Revelation. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. The first things have passed away." And the one who was seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." Also he said, "Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true." Then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift from the spring of the water of life." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Please be seated. As we know, this is a celebration of All Saints. And the story of this morning is the story of Lazarus being raised from the dead. The Lord is with you.
And also with you.
The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to John.
Glory to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after those 2 days, he said to his disciples, "Now come, let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he'll be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" Martha said, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when Mary heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had finished saying this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." The Gospel of Christ. Well, after 2 days of knowing that Lazarus was ill, Jesus finally and purposefully turned his attention to go visit with Lazarus. And it was a journey that was quite dangerous. The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" So very often the disciples were mindful of the resistance of the people that were around at that time, the resistance to the things that Jesus was about. And they experienced firsthand the kind of fear and the terror that came with not being loved by everybody and being oppressed by many. And they begged caution for Jesus, but every time the disciples tell Jesus something, Jesus has something to teach them. And so is the case in today's lesson. We hear Jesus answer their fear. "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them." If anybody here knows exactly what all of that means, let me know. Great to have a conversation about it. Generally speaking, it's about Jesus saying, trust the process. Trust the process. Trust that you walk by a light that will not let you stumble. And Jesus is talking, of course, about the inner light. And though they may fear, there is to be no hesitancy, because the light is the powerful hand of God at work. And so today's story, as long as it was, calls us over and over again to acknowledge a majestic, unstoppable plan that has as its center the will of God. And it is a journey that has room for fear, but it has no room for hesitancy, Because the will of God is what we long for deep in our souls. The will of God quenches our thirst and it feeds our longings. And many of you may be able to relate to this if you think back this, perhaps in the last week or two, in a time when you were struggling with something, not certain of what it is that you should be doing, and perhaps even a little apprehensive about making a decision. But we move through it. Why do we do it? Because we have to do it. And same with this walk with God, this trusting of the process. It's fearful, it's scary, and there's room for those feelings in our faith journey. But there's no room for hesitancy. We don't stop just because we're scared. And this is what Jesus was wanting for his disciples to come to believe in. I mean, there's all kinds of stories in Scripture about it. You think of the story with the raging sea when they're all out in water, right? Same story. You know? Yes, it's storming. Yes, you're afraid. But calm yourselves. Trust in God's will. The will of God can be a confusing, seemingly contrary power at work. Human experience tells us that God doesn't act exactly when, where, and how we think God ought to act. Because of this, I really believe, and I've mentioned this, all through the summer, that it is our expectations that get us into trouble. It is our expectations that cause doubt. It is our expectations that cause us grief. It is our expectations that limit our potential. And just on the side, how many here have shared their faith journey with someone, and that someone has said to them, yeah, but if God existed and the Spirit was at work, why then does that happen? Why then does this happen? And why then does that happen, right? And what do? They turn their backs, and that's their excuse. What is that about? What they expect ought to be. Expectations cause doubt, they cause grief, and they limit our potential. A mature faith trusts in the process. A mature faith, instead of working to make happen what we think ought to happen, releases expectations of what should be. When I was not too much younger, my faith journey was a lot about trying to control, manipulate, and be in right relationship to the world around me. If I didn't like something, I'd leave. If I liked something, I stayed. If something got in my way, I bowled it over, or I did some fancy political maneuvering and got around. And I thought, this is, as I get to be a priest, I get older, I'll just know how to do this even better. Yeah. It didn't work that way. And what I am discovering in my faith journey is that I need to let go of my expectations, let go of my manipulating, let go of my youthful energy to change, to manipulate, to move on, and begin to stay present, letting go of my expectations. Because a mature faith stays present in the moment. It's not concerned about tomorrow. It's not even concerned about yesterday. It may be suffering because of yesterday, but it's concerned about being in the moment. Right now, who are you as a vessel of God? Mature faith keeps that at the forefront. Receiving life as it comes, as opposed to making a maneuver and walking, and it just stays as life comes. And it responds to life from a center, with an open heart and an open mind, living by grace alone, in a thankful hopefulness that all is as it should be. Mature faith is not about developing wisdom in the ways of the world like I used to think it was, or in the ways of the church as I used to think it was. Mature faith is about developing wisdom in the ways of the soul, goes from the external to the internal, living from the inside out, learning to trust that the light is within us. Throughout our gospel story today of Jesus traveling unsafe territory to raise Lazarus from the dead, we find emphasized the majestic, unstoppable plan of God's will. When Jesus arrived safely at the home of Lazarus, his sister Mary and Martha came out to greet him. They said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." But don't forget, Jesus decided not to be there, right? 2 days after he heard, he didn't show up. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. "Where have you laid him?" And he began to weep. Some of the people there said this: expectations. Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Expectations. What they think ought to have been. Then Jesus, disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." What's the stone? Expectations. Death. Close it off. Jesus said, "Open it up." And they said, "It stinks. He's been dead 4 days." Open it up. Let loose. Release. Allow the power of God to be here. Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" And I believe that that is the statement that underpins the entire story of Lazarus. Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And Jesus says that to you right this very day. If you believe, trust the process, you will see the glory of God. That's it. And the mature faith will look to uphold that, and look to believe in it, and look to live from the truth that it's happening. The will of God is so often fulfilled in a manner that sidesteps possibilities. How could Lazarus have been raised from 4 days of death? It's really funny about the story. As I was reading it, they said the dead man came out wrapped in bandages. It wasn't Lazarus came out. Ta-da! The dead man came out. It's like this Halloween story, eh? The mummy. I think God has a sense of humor too. And the will of God exceeds our expectations of what ought to be. There's no amount of ignorance, nor any depth of pain or tragedy, nor any sin or any fault, nor any addiction or any hardness of heart that stands between you and the infinite love and abundant life that lies waiting for us to claim and to reclaim and to reclaim and to reclaim. Like Lazarus being raised from the dead, the unstoppable, majestic power of God's will breathes new life into all things. And there is nothing that is not possible, even when it looks over and done, gone and buried.